All right, here we are again. Seriously, I can't wait to talk with Nancy about failed humor. What was that terrible joke I heard the other day? Ah, right. What do you call a fish with no eyes? A fish. Awesome. So bad, yet makes me laugh. Okay, enough warm up. Off to the virtual recording studio. Uh-huh. Oh, Nancy is already in the waiting room. So let's crush this.
The Community Lab, your podcast that connects professional communication research, practice, and people.
Hi, and welcome to the Community Lab. I'm Danny, producer and host of this Knowledge Transfer podcast, and I'm glad you've tuned in to this exciting lab talk about humor, and more importantly, what happens when humor fails. Today's guest is someone I hadn't met before recording, just like in Lab Talk 7 with Christy Beers-Fageston, where we talked about swearing. If you remember that episode, great. If not, you know what to do. Off the record, I told Christy about my fascination with humor research, and she immediately said, "You have to invite Nancy Bell from Washington State University." A word and a blow. So here we are. In this lab talk, Nancy explains what humor is, how it works, and where its limits lie in everyday interaction. All from a linguistic perspective. And don't worry, we're not diving into syntax or morphology. Instead, we explore why jokes sometimes fall flat, what humor competence and performance have to do with it, and how we try and sometimes fail to be funny. So, in a way, this episode is about me, because research is often me-search. So, let's ease into a jovial mood, and if you're not in one yet, you probably will be in a few minutes, as we join Nancy in the wonderfully awkward world of bad jokes. Enjoy! Hi Nancy, welcome to the Community Lab. Thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Nancy, before we talk about your story and your research on language and humor in particular, my podcast buddy, ChatGPT, created an introduction, as usual. And so let's check out what it hallucinated this time.
Nancy Bell is an associate professor in the Department of English at Washington State University, where her research unpacks humor, language play, and intercultural pragmatics in multilingual interactions. With around 30 peer-reviewed publications, she has made major contributions to our understanding of how humor functions and sometimes misfires across linguistic and cultural boundaries. Her influential book, We Are Not Amused, Failed Humor in Interaction, offers the first comprehensive study of failed humor, presenting a classification of different failure types and exploring their impact on relationships and identity. Her earlier work, including Humor in the Classroom, a guide for language teachers and educational researchers, turned humor from a side note into a central topic in language education and applied linguistics. ChatGPT thinks that Professor Bell's work offers a vital and timely lens for organizations and leaders alike, because humor is not just about laughter. It's a communicative force that can create connection, reveal misunderstanding, and sometimes undermine relationships. Her insights will help us explore how joking and laughter perform, or misperform, in professional settings.
Okay, thanks ChatGPT for the introduction. I see your face, Nancy. Okay, how much was hallucinated here?
Okay, ChatGPT has me as an associate professor, so that's just wrong. That's many years wrong.
Okay.
I'm a full professor.
Check.
I also think I am 90% sure that my book with Ann Pomerantz about teaching and using humor in the second language classroom, I think I'm 99% sure that came after this book on failed humor. And I think it was before that.
Okay.
It also said had a focus on multilingual interaction, which I don't really think is accurate. I feel like most of my work has either been with second language users, like how do you use and understand humor in an additional language, right? And some work with how might playing around with language facilitate whether and how we learn language.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of one strand. This is how I would explain it, right?
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
I have an interest in humor broadly. Part of it is with respect to the second language learners. And then the other part of it is specifically this thing on failed humor. So ChatGPT, I don't know. I'd give it a C+ for that.
Okay. Yeah, maybe because it's not the premium versions.
Oh,
That's
you got the cheap one, huh?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's
I started
okay.
my assistant professor position recently, so I have to build up.
There you go.
Okay, great. Nancy, I usually start each lab talk by asking my guests how they found their way into communication research. In your case, however, it's linguistics, a field that's closely related but comes with its own lens, so to speak. So, how did your journey into studying language begin, and what sparked your curiosity in the first place?
I will always credit an unknown undergraduate advisor at the University of Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
Off to college I go, and just because, that was what was expected of me by my parents.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of dorky, and so, I like to study. So off I go to college. And back in those days, you met with a human to help you with your schedule in a big gymnasium. And I don't know who I talked to, but I came down to college thinking, I guess I'll be an English major. I like to read. I didn't really even know what was available. That person asked me whatever they asked me the right questions.
Okay.
And they said, oh, you might like linguistics. Hadn't ever heard of it. So I signed up the first semester of my freshman year. I signed up for Intro to Linguistics.
Mm-hmm.
I went and bought the book, and just looking at the book, I was like, oh, I'm majoring in this. Like, I just decided that my very first day. I looked at the book and I was like, oh, you can just do word puzzles for 4 years. I mean, that's what it felt like to me, figuring out the structure of language. And I loved every aspect. Every time I took a class, except for syntax, I just loved it. And, I went straight through. And the last courses I took were about like second language acquisition, and I took one in second language teaching methodology, and I did a little practicum at the local middle school, and I had also been tutoring international students there for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so away I went on that. Maybe if I had taken something different as my last classes, I would have ended up doing something different, but that's just how it worked out.
Mm-hmm. That's great. By the way, I started meteorology at first, but
Oh.
only for 2.5 weeks, because then there was the first knockout exam, and I knocked myself out because I was pretty bad in algebra and whatever it was, and and then I turned to communication research.
Yeah, I feel you. I would never have made that mistake because I had to take remedial math when I went to college.
Okay.
Like algebra 099, didn't even get to the 100 level. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I would like to know, when you think about communication and language, not just as a researcher, but also as a private person, how do you approach language and communication from these two perspectives? Is there a difference how you look at language and interaction from the perspective as a linguist, as a scholar, and then as a private person?
So certainly there's things that I would say as a private person that I wouldn't say in front of a class, for example, right? Like in a class, I have my linguist hat on, and I'm so like, let's say using an accent, right? Like, okay, so a really common kind of a thing that people do in the US, and every country and every region has their thing, is there's a particular accent that you can use that indexes or points to someone as being stupid, right?
Okay.
So in the US, it's quite typically the Southern accent. So let's say you're voicing someone and you say, oh, and then he said, yeah, okay. Or I don't know. I can't even think of an example right now or do it. But people do that regularly. It's in the media. You see, it seems to be very just acceptable to make fun of how people talk and to use it in derogatory ways like that. So not the type of thing that I would do even in private. But I'm also going to say I'm not immune, right? I could do that, right? But I would definitely not do it in front of a class. But I think about language a lot. I choose words. My husband uses words with their meanings really loosely. I'll give you an example. He says, he talks about, like corrupt, maybe. I think that was the word. We had a huge discussion. I mean, it resulted in a big misunderstanding because he was talking about corrupt. And to me, that has a very specific legal definition. And to me, what he was talking about is things that were legal but immoral. Right? Yeah. And so I don't know. I pay a lot of I pay a lot of attention to the words and I take them at their value. Anyway, but I'm also interested. Like now that I know that he uses that way, I can sort of go, oh, I know what he's talking about. I don't need to ask him about that. Yeah.
Are you constantly analyzing people, how they talk?
Totally. I got a notepad right here. I might copy down some things to use. I've told my students that too. Like when I teach sociolinguistics. I tell the students, I say, a lot of this class is about eavesdropping. You're going to be paying attention to people. And I have in my Evernote app on my phone, I have a note it's titled Malapropisms. And it's things like I'm watching TV or I hear people say things and I'll go and I'll write it down because it's interesting. I can use it as an example in class. Maybe it just made me laugh. I don't know. But I just, yeah. And I mean, and why did they say it this way and not that way? And, that kind of thing. Yeah. I'm always listening to people. That's the nice thing about being a linguist is like, there is just entertainment all around you.
Now that we've got a sense of how you found your way into linguistics and how you think about it, I'd love to turn to your research side of things and your work on humor and, of course, specifically on your work on failed humor. So let's start at the beginning. How did you become interested in studying humor and what drew you to this research topic in the first place?
So I had to be told how I got drawn to this. It seems like it was always there. So actually, when I was an undergraduate at University of Oregon in my sociolinguistics class, I remembered this in later years. I did a paper where I was interested in gender differences. This was, the late 80s. So I was interested in very simplistic gender differences in humor use. And so I recorded a group of my guy friends talking and a group of my female friends talking and transcribed it and looked at the different kinds of humor. So I remembered that in later years and thought, oh, I guess I've always been interested in this. And then, so fast forward to graduate school, I don't know what I read. I don't know what I thought, but I got interested in this idea about using humor in another language. And I started looking into the literature, and it was really nice because there was kind of just enough, like when you're a PhD student and you're like, well, this has been done to death, or there's not enough to even get started, right? Like, oh, I'm clearly asking a crazy question, but there was kind of just enough.
Yeah.
The school that I was at, this is not something really that they do, but so I went and I asked my advisor, or I asked one of the people, would you be my advisor if I did something on humor? And I'd like to do these case studies and just kind of explore and see how people use and understand humor in a second language. She said yes. And you can also see that I was not at all focused on the future. I wasn't thinking like, no one will give me a job doing this. I was just like, this sounds like fun, which has kind of been the way I've stumbled through the whole career. So I feel pretty lucky. So one time I was showing her what I was doing. We were kind of having an update, and she said, so interesting, Nancy. I usually think that people study things that are challenging for them. So, like somebody who has a lot of trouble with pronunciation in a second language, they'll study pronunciation.
Yeah.
And she said, but I think of you as a funny person. And I thought of this for a second, and I said, not in French, I'm not. And I realized as she said that, I was like, yeah, when like French is my best second language. And and I have, I lived in France for a year. I lived in Cameroon using French for a couple years. And yeah, I felt like it was a part of me, that was missing. Like you don't really know who I am. Anyway, so I just thought that was an interesting insight. So that's the best I could do is I think, I just kind of got interested in it. Maybe it was because I have felt it myself. Yeah.
And are you funny in French now or still not?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, it's arguable. Maybe I'm not even funny in English, right? That was that professor's judgment. So,
okay.
Yeah.
The next thing I would like to know is, we are scholars, definitions are very important. And also humor is a very multifaceted and ambiguous phenomenon, right? So from a linguistic perspective, how do you define humor? And how does this definition differ from, I would say, definitions in psychology or communication or sociology or whatever?
I would tend to focus on humor as utterances, verbal, or signed, some kind of linguistic utterances that are intended to amuse or intended to elicit amusement. Intention is very fraught in linguistics, right? We don't know what's happening in people's heads.
Yeah.
Even in your own head, you might say something with kind of multiple intentions, or your intention changes as you're saying it. So that is a bit fraught, but we also tend to stay close to the text, right? And look and see, well, how do I said something that maybe I had given you some cues, was intended to be funny, and you laughed, or you said, haha, that's funny, right? You can see that we are interpreting that utterance the same way.
Yeah.
Certainly linguists tend to look closely at text. I came up in an era too where we were comfortable for the most part just using audio, right? We didn't have digital cameras and especially like digital annotation and analysis was a lot harder. And I don't anymore feel like that's satisfactory. So anyway, linguists are looking a lot more at like all the things we do for communication, looking at our faces and our gestures and our bodies and those kinds of things. So I think that's where we need to be. But I do think the difference is certainly the focus on language, on what the different things we say mean to people, how we negotiate meaning, how we work to understand each other. And I would say, like, psychologists in particular, I think, are then much more interested in like sense of humor, like what is it, what are the different qualities that make it up, and sometimes these batteries of tests, what correlates with that. So it's more internal, although I do know, of course, there's all the discursive psychologists who, to me, their work is very adjacent. Yeah. And I think in sociology, you have more the same thing, people working in maybe a lot more quantitative paradigms. And so I tend to do qualitative research. That's what I enjoy also. So that's another place where my perspective comes from.
Research is me search, right? So when I told a few people that I invite you for a lab talk on failed humor, they said like, wow, this is an episode about you.
Oh.
So it's close to my heart, this topic. And
I thought you were going to say, they said, oh my God, that lady is going to be terrible.
No, they said like, that fits very well.
Okay.
What I would like to know, or the listeners also want to know, of course, is what is failed humor and what are some of the main reasons why humor can fail?
Yeah. Something just sparked my curiosity. And so I looked in the databases, like the, language and linguistic behavior database. And I was just like, failed humor, not funny. I started, what do we know about this? Because I was already a humor scholar and I couldn't find anything. So then I started to just pay more attention. And I was ending up with like a database of things that I said that my husband didn't laugh at,
Okay.
or that didn't work out. And, and so I thought, oh, I kind of need to expand this. So I initially just started focusing on responses because that's really easy.
Yeah.
Because you can elicit them, right? So I would go around and I would tell a stupid joke and see what people said. And and then I would be teaching sociolinguistics classes and I'd send the students out. So I ended up with hundreds of examples of responses to failed humor. You asked, how does humor fail? Well, the person doesn't think it's funny, right? So, and I think that's what we mostly think of. And then I started to think, well, also though, we could do this same thing because humor also fails because people didn't get the joke.
Yeah.
Right. So then I did the same thing and came up with a joke that was hard to understand. Nobody ever got it. And we did the same thing, went around and told it, saw what people said. But then as you start to think about it, humor can fail in a lot of different ways just because someone wasn't paying attention. They didn't know you were joking. So I think the big ones that we might think of are like, did they recognize it as a joke? Right? That's one thing you have to first realize someone's trying to joke. So that's a big way. And then did they understand it? Did they get the joke? And then if they got it, did they appreciate it? And appreciation has a whole bunch of things you can unpack.
Okay.
Right? So just not funny to me, not my style, kind of corny humor or something. Personally, I like that joke about what's brown and sticky, a stick,
Okay, yeah, it's a good one. Actually. Yeah.
Oh, you're so kind. So another way, I just didn't like it. I'm offended, right? That's another way. There's things also where you might find it funny at one time and not at another time, sort of like, ooh, that, really for like fraught things, disease and death. And maybe it's a little too soon for that kind of joke. So those kinds of things. And we can also talk about failure as you might think a joke is funny, but then also at the same time think it's rude, sexist, racist, or just off a little bit. And so, but you might still be able to laugh at it, right? Like I recognize that's funny, but so people sometimes do that combination of thing. And so that's the other thing that's interesting as part of the success of humor. Like ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to time it so that we laugh together. And we give all kinds of cues. Elisa Gironzetti has a great book that has all, like, she's so taken advantage of like video and eye tracking, technology and looking at like how important our mouth is, and where is the other person looking? And so how is it that we coordinate our behavior so that, oh, look, we managed to laugh together. And the best thing then is when the other person joins in, right? I mean, it's often a kind of failure on my part if you say something and I'm kind of like, ha ha ha, and then I don't have a great way to respond.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Humor is difficult and very complex, as we know.
It is. It is very difficult and very complex. It does a lot of stuff.
Oh, yeah. In your book, you also mentioned the relationship between humor competence, humor performance, and failed humor. Could you walk us through how competence and performance relate to failed humor and maybe give one or two examples so to illustrate what you mean by that? That would be awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So this actually comes from linguistic competence and performance. Okay. And so I'll explain those briefly and then how it's kind of been extended for humor. So
Perfect.
Just in case, for your non-linguists. So basically your linguistic competence is what you know and your performance is what you do. And it's important to recognize that both of these are dynamic. So first of all, our competence. So, all right. So we know language, right?
Mhm.
And we're using it. But we don't always perform up to our competence. So like just right there at the beginning of my answer, I kind of like stumbled around trying to figure out how to organize what was in my head. We know often too that we misspeak, we mispronounce things, or
Yeah.
right. So there's all kinds of things where we aren't able to perform our competence. And our competence, I think oftentimes we think about knowing something and we think, oh, well, if you know it, you know it, right?
Mhm.
But our competence is also dynamic like our performance. So we can sound very competent with certain people that we're talking to, depending on who they are, right? So maybe if I'm talking to my students and I'm talking about language at a certain level, I probably sound more competent than I do, let's say on this podcast where I'm trying to be, I'm trying to pull up my professional knowledge, or
Yeah.
let's say I'm talking to like a very senior colleague in the field who's very well known, I might become less competent, right?
Mhm.
And also just sometimes if someone's easy to talk to, we're very competent, right? Someone who you're really comfortable with, like, oh, that person, that they're really easy to talk to. And I then sound very fluent and smart and fun and, and whatever. And we don't always perform our competence though, but our performance also gives us a window into our competence, like what we know.
Okay.
So the idea of humor competence, it goes back quite a ways, and I built that, I did not make that up. I got that from work that other people had done. And they really started to kind of pull apart competence as these different parts. So your humor competence, originally, it was sort of the difference between can you recognize humor and then can you appreciate it? That was the initial part of it.
Mhm.
And then that got expanded into kind of the stuff that I was mentioning earlier, like, well, you have to be able to recognize humor. Then you have to be able to understand it. And then you have to figure out whether you agree with any messages that might come along with that humor.
Mhm.
And some of those might be social messages, right? Just like, oh, is this kind of humor funny, or is it funny to us, or is it too corny? Is it too childish, or whatever? So taste can even come into the messages.
Yeah.
And then appreciation, right? And all the different ways that can go on. Then you have to decide, are you going to appreciate it or not? Maybe you appreciate it, but you're like, I don't want to laugh at that here. These people are going to judge me, right? So all kinds of things can happen there. And then do you engage with that joke and build on it?
Mhm.
So, and of course, then we see those competencies in our performance. So that's another thing that linguists do, right? We're looking at the performance to understand the competence.
Okay.
And I will also add that as with linguistic competence, humor competence is unitary and it's dynamic and it changes, right? Maybe you're funnier with some people than with other people.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
over time, right? As your life changes and you have different experiences, things that were funny before might not seem so funny. Last night I said, I'm so tired. Let's just watch that Austin Powers movie that I haven't seen in ages. And it's leaving Netflix soon.
Mhm.
So we watched it. Wow.
Not funny anymore.
Yeah, that movie is 30 years old. Like that just that doesn't stand up anymore. It's like watching Laurel and Hardy or something, so yeah.
While you were talking, I was also thinking, yeah, sometimes, when a person I don't like tells a joke, and even though the joke is actually good, then I would never reveal that I like the joke because I don't like the person.
Yes. No. So that's a huge part of humor is in-group, out-group stuff.
Mhm. Mhm.
Iselinda Kuipers and somebody else, they had an article quite a while ago. I think it might have been, they had a couple different ones, Danish humor and British humor in a couple of, and asking people about their taste. She's written a fair amount about tastes. And I will read some quotes from those people because they'll talk about their sense of humor and, oh, these are comedians I like. And I don't know, if I met someone and they didn't like this person and they'll cuss, they'll just be like, you are so stupid and I would never want to hang out with you, just because they like a different comedian. So it's a big part of our identity.
True.
And it's such an important way that we can find out about people. You mentioned something about ambiguity earlier, and that's a big way we have miscommunication in general, is introducing ambiguity into conversation, and either in like structural ambiguity or use an ambiguous word, or just ambiguous in, what did you mean by that? Gee, it's cold in here. Are you just making a comment, or do you want me to go close the window? Right. I think ambiguity is humor's superpower. I think that's why it's so useful, because somebody who you just met, like, we're always told, like, avoid these topics. Here are the taboo topics: money and religion and politics. And yet one way we can start to probe that stuff is by making a joke, seeing how the other person responds, right? And so that is, it's a really important way that we figure out, are you like me or not, right?
Yeah.
Because of, partly, do we have the same sense of humor? That's one thing.
That's important.
And then the other part is the messages that are in humor, right? We can find out, like, oh, are we on the same page about this more serious topic, or that kind of thing.
Okay, so now it's getting a bit more technical. So I hope the listeners don't turn it off now, the podcast. Let's give it a shot, because together with Salvatore Attardo, I don't know if you would pronounce it this way, but I think he was born in Italy.
Yes.
Together with him, you developed a 10-level framework for analyzing failed humor. Could you give us a quick overview of how this framework works? We don't have the time to unpack everything. Could you just pick 3 or 4 levels you find especially important when it comes to failed humor?
Yeah. Okay. First, I want to say, Sal and I did a 7-level framework. There's 3 levels that are all me.
Okay. I'm sorry. Now I feel bad about myself.
Yeah. Did you get that off of ChatGPT?
Yeah. ChatGPT is to blame. It's okay.
I'm just giving you a hard time.
It's okay. You're not the first one.
Yeah. So maybe the easy thing about that framework is we kind of have an initial sort of, I'll call them a lower level set of triggers of miscommunication that can happen in any kind of communication. And then we have the ones that are specific to humor. The ones at the lower level are a lot more linguistic. Like, we're going to use words like problems with morphology or phonology. So just things like pronunciation or misspeaking a word, or even things like someone's just not paying attention to you. So all the ways. So what I do also in the book is I look at those ways, and I look at what do they look like in humor.
Yeah.
So they maybe look a little bit different because of that important social piece that humor does, right? But in general, it's the same kinds of things, like somebody misheard, somebody misspoke, somebody said something ambiguous, their intentions were unclear. Like teachers, I know this is a problem for me sometimes. I'll ask students questions, and they're so used to teachers asking teacher questions where I know the answer and I'm testing you, that sometimes I have to say, no. I'm really asking you.
Okay.
Like, I really want to know, or I really don't understand, right? So that issue with intentions certainly happens with humor. Cueing, or what we call framing problems. I think a lot of people are familiar with the idea of like how we frame things, like, right, we're framing this as a podcast discussion right now. And with humor, sometimes the way that how we set up a humor frame can be unclear or ambiguous. Somebody who is a very deadpan humor person and you haven't known them very long, you might not pick up on their humor, those kinds of things. So those are kind of lower level types of triggers of miscommunication. But when we are talking about humor, then we have and these are really similar to kind of what we've already gone through when we're talking about the stages or the things that you have to know to understand humor. But then we kind of flip it and what happens when it fails. So, of course, that's what I started to do, right? So when we're talking about you understand all the words. I'm going to skip identification. That has to do with framing, right? But being able to identify humor, and that's really related to other kind of pragmatic things, right? Like, did you identify that as a real teacher question or a teacher type question where they know the answer. So certainly the identification is one level of failure. But so we get up higher. There is the issue of joke incongruity. So generally humor involves some kind of incongruity, something that doesn't quite fit together. It can't be just anything.
Mhm.
But basically, you have understood all of the words, but you don't get it. So you don't have the background information. You don't understand the references. There can be all kinds of reasons why you just don't understand it.
Mhm.
And then I think the appreciation one, that's the biggest one.
Okay.
And it's the most painful, right?
How come?
Because I said something funny. You saw that I was trying to be funny,
Mhm.
and you reacted in a way that was like, nope, that was not funny. I didn't like it, or that I offended you, right? So that's a little dangerous for me. I'm kind of like, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Or maybe I did, and I was hoping you would think it was funny and not be offended. I don't know. Or like you said, maybe like you chose not to laugh to hurt me, right? So this is the one where the failure at the level of appreciation, I think so much can go wrong. And it is the kind of the most fraught one, and the one where we see people really carefully negotiating their social identities around that.
Mhm.
Humor's there for fun and amusement, right? I think sometimes those of us who study humor, we forget that big piece of it, right? And because we're always like, it's doing this and it's doing that, and it's so interesting. And so I would just like to do a plug for like, humor is fun. It is there for our enjoyment. I think anyone who has ever made themselves laugh when they're by themselves recognizes that kind of a thing. But it also does all of this other stuff. And it does this serious stuff like allowing us to get to know each other, affirming social bonds. It does a lot of that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But a great thing that we are able to do with humor is issue kind of potentially negative things with some deniability.
Mhm.
This is being very commonly used on the right now, like saying something completely, I was just kidding about that racist thing that I said, right? But guess what? It's still out there. And a lot of people will hear it, when people make public statements like that. But we also do it in a way that I think is maybe not quite so consequential, or just it's a thing that we know, that we come to expect. So teasing is a really common one, where you make a joke about, I don't know, who's going to empty the dishwasher or something, right? And your partner, your roommate, or whoever, then maybe they go and empty the dishwasher because they know you're kind of digging at them a little bit. Or oftentimes we'll say that about people, like, oh, you're always like this. You always react this way. And so oftentimes what we see with teasing is people maybe laughing, but also denying. Right. So very often people deny that proposition unless they no. Even if they're laughing.
Yeah.
And so the messages are also very, very important. Yeah. And then finally, we did go into the appropriate support for humor. Everyone recognizes this usually as thinking of something too late. This is what I should have said, right?
Okay.
But I also think that there's a lot of other ways that we can fail in providing appropriate support. Being awkward, kind of not. And that's often what you try to say something. That's when later on you go, oh, this is what I should have said. I just said that dorky thing, or I thought they were funny. I wanted to show I was funny and add on. And another way too, I'm guilty of this sometimes, just like going too far,
In what way?
Oh gosh. I can't think of a specific example, but I've said a couple times, I don't know, it happens once every few years, I will say something that's just like a little bit too much for the students. I'll say something where I'm like, oh, and then I just got too far. Okay, sorry. I know, I'm just kidding. And hopefully I usually do it by the time they know me well enough. I did get a I did actually get a review that said something about Nancy's lack of filter. It says Nancy's lack of filter ironically helps with learning. And I thought, oh my God, I have my filter on when I'm teaching. So, but yeah, I think a lot of people are probably familiar with taking something a little too far. Jokes. I mean, kids do that all the time, right? Kids often, and you'll see a lot of explicit teaching of humor around kids, kind of when it's like, oh, that's funny. Oh, it's less funny. And kids learn. And I can remember being a kid and that moment when the adults turn and they're done, right? It's not funny anymore. And you learn pretty quickly, like, oh, don't take things too far.
Yeah. Sometimes I take also some things too far, maybe, but
yeah.
But you're also talking in your book about repair strategies when a joke doesn't land. So could you share a few examples of those strategies, and in your view, which ones tend to work best?
Yeah, right. So you're not going to like this answer, because I think the answer to almost all questions of language use, okay, not, language structure, we usually can have some answers, but the answer to questions about language use is almost always, it depends. Okay. 99.99% of the time. So people always say, well, you can't joke at a funeral, Well, I was just at a funeral. There was a lot of laughter. People were, you talk about the person who's gone and share stories, or oftentimes, like it's a place where you can joke around death or those kinds of things. So there aren't really any rules. Just like, oh, you have to be formal in this situation. But actually, then the way we use language can change the situation and make it become very informal. I think the use of the term strategies is maybe something that linguists use too. We talk about strategies, but we're really just talking about ways of doing something. I think strategies suggests that, hey, here's something that we can teach people how to do it, right?
Yeah, consulting language.
Yeah, it's just like a catalog, basically, of what people did. Now, I certainly have hoped that people would take a look at the book and go and delve deeper. And we do, I have seen a lot more work on failed humor. And I think it's great, because I just took real broad strokes in looking at this. So, well, I do think, though, the thing about knowing the strategies maybe is just thinking like, oh, that's something I could do, right? I don't know. There's probably people who go around and teach you how to be humorous or not be humorous, or how to, how to deal with it. That's not me, but I do think, yeah. So I think recognizing them can be helpful, and their effectiveness will certainly depend on the context, who you're talking to, where you are, could be what type of failure it is too. Notice that, right? Did I offend you, or do you just think that I'm just not that funny? But I know also that you are kind of focused on professional communication, right? So I think the first strategy that I talk about is avoiding failure. Like, just avoid it. Just see if you can avoid it. And so there's a couple different ways to do that. One is just provide clear cues. If you're a deadpan person, maybe you need to learn to not be quite so deadpan. That said, being deadpan is often what makes it funny, right? You said it with a real flat affect.
Exactly. The Naked Gun trilogy.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the new one. I haven't seen it. But I mean, this is like deadpan jokes like all over the place, and I love the movies.
Yeah, totally. So, right. So that's a tough one. Avoid it. But another way to avoid it would be, probably shouldn't need to be said, but maybe it does, is that you're just avoiding kind of more dangerous forms of humor. Teasing is one of those, right? So, if you're the leader, maybe you don't want to tease your workers, but people have different ways of teasing, right? For me to tease a friend shows that I, even maybe in a very biting way, maybe especially in a very biting way, it tells the rest of the world that we have a relationship that is so close that we can do this. Professional situations, though, maybe not teasing, maybe not making jokes around taboo kinds of topics. Maybe you can give people a humor trigger warning, like, I'm going to try to be funny now. Maybe not literally like that, but in my book, I call it inoculating yourself, sort of like, well, now most people don't think this is funny, but I'm going to try it, that kind of a thing. the other strategies are things that I think come naturally to us, but maybe if we think of them as strategies, they might be useful. Like, you know what? Your joke flopped, just, move on. You can apologize. You can say, oh, yeah, sorry. My kids don't think I'm funny either. Or people also double down. They'll say, come on, that was funny. Or you can turn it back on yourself. I think oftentimes self-deprecating humor is helpful and useful.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, so those are actually the kinds of things that you could do if you're the one. But I think the other side that we have to think about too is, what if you say something funny and I'm like, oh, didn't understand it, didn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I think most people think of themselves, right? Oh, I tried to joke around and I was talking about even as a child, feeling that feeling of kind of shame, embarrassment. This tells us a lot about how important humor is for us.
Mm-hmm.
We forget that the hearer is also placed in a really challenging position, because if I don't understand it, right? Well, I guess I'm kind of dumb or something.
Mm-hmm.
I had a student, when I had students gathering data, I had a student who went home, tried to gather this data from his wife, told his wife this joke that was hard to understand, and she started crying.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. And you write up your institutional review board for human studies and you think, I don't know, I can't really think of any risks to people. And I felt terrible about that. I was like, yep, nope, you don't have to do this anymore. And she had a bad day and, it was a particular situation, but I was then acutely aware that we were putting people in this position and they might feel bad about themselves for not getting it. But again, it shows you have to, there's different ways of dealing with it. And what if you don't appreciate it? Well, I think it depends on what's happening here. Is this my boss? And I want to get along to go along to get along. How's that phrase go? Anyway, I'm going to laugh. Just everyone else is laughing, right? Even though I didn't appreciate it. Or, move on. Is it a situation, maybe, like with your boss, maybe you just want to laugh, but maybe with your best friend, you want to shut that down. You do not want to pretend to laugh and be like, yeah, this is the kind of humor we use now, right?
Yeah.
Oh, funny potty joke, adult friend. Okay, I love a good potty joke. What am I saying? Anyway, it's going to depend on your relationship. It's going to depend on the time. It's going to depend on the place. I think maybe the trickiest one, and especially these days, this has been really kind of fraught, sort of like humor gets weaponized, right? Where you're in this double bind. If someone says something that is offensive, if you don't say anything, you're acquiescing. Probably both that maybe you think it's funny and that you accept the message that it's delivering, right? So there's that.
Yeah.
If you say something, all of a sudden you're somebody with no sense of humor. Obviously, I was just joking, the person says, right? So there's this deniability. So that, I think, that's a tough one. And some people have looked a bit more at offense, because that's the hardest one, I think, to deal with, and very common now.
You mentioned leaders, how to joke or when to joke with leaders, or if we should joke with leaders. So maybe you have some advice here for people in leadership positions. So do's and don'ts, maybe goes, no goes, I don't know.
I can say a few things about that. And a lot of my stuff comes from education, because I tend to work with teachers and learners, but I am going to point you to the work of Stephanie Schnur, who has done a lot of work with humor and failed humor and leadership and gender. And it's really, really great work. And you should have her on the pod.
Okay.
So one of them I already mentioned is, I don't know if I said it quite this way, but just like sarcasm, teasing that isn't bonding teasing that's a little more, that has criticisms in it. Like, students don't like that. Students do not like jokes at their expense. Like, go figure, right?
Mhm.
I'm not going to say it doesn't mean I don't make them, but right. So, and that's another thing too. Like I said, sometimes I will go a little far and I say things that I think a lot of people would go like, whoa. Like I tell students, nope, you're wrong, like all the time. But I think, we build up a relationship and they get to know who I am. So again, it really depends.
Yeah.
That's how we end up going too far, though, is because, sometimes I can do that kind of thing. But so, yeah, if you're in doubt, I assume other people are like humans too, or like students, sorry, or like students too, that they don't like humor at their own expense. Oftentimes comedians will talk about like punching up and punching down, right? Don't punch down, that's just not.
Yeah, you shouldn't do
Yeah,
that.
I know some people like that, but that's fine. Like it in your private life, I would also say humor is never necessary. Unless you're a stand-up comedian, we don't have to be funny. We don't have to try to be funny. It's not, as rarely, I'm going to say, because I don't know, with language, I don't ever want to say never with language use, but I can't think of very many situations where it is a requirement to be funny.
Mm-hmm.
You can just skip it. I've observed a lot of teachers, and I am kind of jocular. I'm kind of like, cajole students along into doing things. But one of the best teachers I ever saw was a graduate student. She was so serious, and the students would zip through their group conversation, and she would come over to them and she'd say, are you done? Did you discuss this? Take advantage of this time. What about this? And she'd push them. And I thought, oh, I could never do that. But I felt like, oh, that made like a really intellectual atmosphere in her class. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Students do love a funny teacher too, but you don't have to be.
Yeah, that's true. I've learned a lot today. Thank you so much. Before we wrap up with the quick fire round, just a quick question on your future endeavors. Is there something on your research agenda? I know that humor or failed humor hasn't been your focus in recent years, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what's on the horizon for the next few years, let's say?
Yeah, there's a few things on the horizon that I'm kind of churning around. A thing that I've started a little bit is unintentional humor and how people negotiate that. A big
Mm-hmm.
problem with studying the unintentional humor is capturing examples of it, right? So a lot of them end up being very public examples of politicians and things like that. And I would also really like, regular people interacting in private, but it's hard to get. So I'm interested in that. I'm also had started a while back a little bit of work that I'd like to continue on jocular deception.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of thing where, let's say one example actually that I've used, kind of having my students do a little bit of work with this, is a young couple calls up their parents, and it's a real actual transcribed example. It's some Australian data, and they're like, oh, guess what? We're going to be parents, blah, blah. And the parents are, oh no, oh my God. The parents are so excited. And then it turns out they say they got a dog, right? So that's jocular deception. And I think I think Americans do it a fair amount. And oftentimes I hear myself doing it often just in really short ways, just like saying, yeah, I'll do that, when, no, I won't. Or, just really silly, stupid little things.
Okay.
And then I think you'll like this one. This isn't exactly about humor, but it's about podcasting.
Mm-hmm. Tell me more.
You familiar with the television show, The Office?
Yeah, of course.
So I'm talking about the American version.
Mm-hmm.
And then the two female leads have a podcast called The Office Ladies Podcast.
Oh, I don't know. I have to check that out.
I'm one of those people. I'm like an Office lover. Anyway, so they have a podcast. It's a rewatch podcast. And
okay.
It's finished now. And it's so interesting. So I would like to go through that. This is something where I'm like, I need a young graduate student to help me with this.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it would be really fun to ask some questions about like they're not podcasters. And so as they start out, they're just learning to do this, and how they're like, oh, we're going to have this structure. And then it sort of develops and changes. And you can sort of hear the way they talk changes. I think they get kind of more of a podcast voice. So I would need some acoustic analysis type of person probably.
Okay.
And then the other thing that's really interesting to me about that, so is partly how they get into and develop their just podcast structure, voice, that whole thing. And then all these different strategies they have for building community. So they built this huge community around, like, these people who love The Office. They love The Office. And there's websites, and they have all this communication with fans, and these things that they start to add in that have had them basically build a kind of a podcast empire of their own.
Okay.
And listening to that start to finish is interesting, and I love it too. I'm like, this is a really feasible project. I'm also happy if anyone listening just grabs on and takes it and does it. I'm happy to share things.
Mhm.
The data's right there. The acoustic, the acoustic data and the transcripts that you can look at. So it's, rich and public and easy to look at. So that's just something that came to my mind as I was listening all the way through the Office Ladies podcast.
There you go. That is pretty cool. So before we really end this podcast, it's time for our quick fire round. 5 rapid questions, 5 spontaneous answers, no overthinking allowed. Are you ready, Nancy?
I am so ready.
So ready. Okay, then let's go.
The quick fire round.
What's the most common misconception people have about humor research?
Oh, that we're ruining humor.
Okay.
Why would you study humor? You're just going to ruin it. Like, nobody ever says, why would you study grief and sorrow? Like everyone will, I don't know, like other emotions and reactions and things don't get that. But yeah, maybe in a second one. Can I give a second one?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sure.
Humor researchers are funny.
We talked about that off the
Yeah,
record.
that is not always true. People study things they don't understand. Yes.
Question number 2. If you could have one superpower to use in academic life, what would it be?
Oh, God, I'd love a better memory. That, to just like remember everything that I read and remember names and dates. And I don't know. That could just be an aging thing. I don't remember that stuff as well as I did. So yeah, I would really like a better memory. That'd be great. Super memory.
If you weren't a linguist, what else would you be doing for a living?
I would definitely either be, well, it's one or the other, but they're very closely related. I would either be the person who makes up the paint colors, or I'd be the person who makes up the names for new drugs.
Do you have some experience here, or is it just something?
None at all. No, I guess I would have had to get a degree in marketing. I have a lot of alternative careers. I got a book called What Would the Cat Do? That I got something like that. Or I could be an archaeologist.
If you had to summarize your research philosophy in just 3 words, what would they be?
Just 3 words. I could do it in 2. I don't know. Be curious. Ask questions.
Be very curious.
No, there you go. Thank you. Be very curious. No.
Ask many questions.
Yeah, but when you be very curious, that sounds ominous. Like, be very afraid. So maybe just be curious. Yeah.
Okay, and then final question. What's something that reliably makes you laugh?
I'm just thinking of this thing that I just said.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'll just tell you.
Sure.
One time, my late husband said we were on a trip. We were all in Mexico, and my young niece, she was probably like 5, 6, and we're on the beach, and she says to my husband, she goes, "Your boobs look weird." And he turned around to her. Oh yeah, you're already laughing. Wait. He turned around and he goes, "Your boobs look weird." And that just cracked me. Your boobs look weird. Your boobs look weird. Just a child.
Okay, good. That was the quick fire round.
Yeah.
Nancy, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your research and your insights on humor and failed humor in particular. You've given us something to think about a lot, especially for me, because as I mentioned, failed humor is my expertise. And in my case, it's seriously an expertise. And thanks for being on the show. And I just say take care and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
That was the Lab Talk with Nancy Bell. As always, I hope you found something to take with you, besides the idea of avoiding humor altogether to stay on the safe side. I, for one, have learned that being a serious teacher has its advantages, though I'm still not completely convinced. We also heard today that humor competence and performance are dynamic, and that the interplay is crucial if you want to land a joke. We've also learned that humor, or a sense of humor, is deeply tied to one's identity, and that we often choose friends and partners based on shared humor styles. And if you're a leader, you need to be especially mindful. Don't tease too much, avoid punching down with derogatory jokes, and remember that what you find funny may not always translate across hierarchies. If you want to dive deeper into humor and how it fails, check out the references in the show notes, carefully handpicked by Nancy. Follow the Community Lab on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And don't forget to give us a like or a 5-star rating. It really helps improve our visibility and expand our outreach. We are also on LinkedIn, so connect with us, share your thoughts, and help us grow this wonderful community of communication nerds. You can also send us feedback and suggestions at communitylab.podcast@gmail.com. We always love hearing from you. That's it for today. The Community Lab will return in late December with the final episode of 2025. Let yourself be surprised. Until then, and don't forget, communication is everywhere. It's in what you say, what you don't, and sometimes in how old Donnie decides to, let's say, redecorate the White House to impress his dictator buddies. That's what I call truly pitiful. Stay curious and keep the conversation alive.